Hey guys, welcome to Hope It Helps. And my guest on the show today is Mr. Ali Salama. Ali, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much, Khaled. How's your day?
It's going well, man. It's going well. We have a day off here today, so just, enjoying it, but also doing some prep for the podcast. So I'm really, really like excited to speak to you. So me and you met, for the people who don't know, me and you met through LinkedIn, and because you hosted a webinar last week all about podcasting in the Middle East, and it was super interesting. And I did some more research into what you do about like your mental health and your mental health ambassador, and that's an area I'm really passionate about as well. So I thought it'd be amazing to have you on the show and speak to you. But for the
Thank you.
people who don't know Ali, why don't you guys give everyone a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
A little bit about myself is that I actually used to live in Dubai too. I now live in Toronto. Um, I grew up I was born and raised in Cairo, and for a good time, for a good chunk of my life, I believe about 14 to 15 years, I swam professionally, and I swam at the World Championships in Dubai. I believe that was the last time I actually swam like on at a very big event in 2014. I moved to Toronto here, and I used to actually go to Dubai English Speaking College as well in Dubai. That's right by Academic City. It's a British school, and I did my A levels there. Yeah, I was the swim team captain, the water polo captain. I really was immersed into sports and athletics, and it all changed when like I came here and I thought. And by the way, I got really high grades as well, so that really boosted my confidence. And I was like, yeah, I don't need to finish grade 13. I just came to Toronto straight away because why do grade year 13 when I already knew I wanted to come to Canada, so I came here and just right before I turned 18. I was 17, and I thought I could do very well, take the world by storm. And I always knew I had this entrepreneurial drive in me. I was a singer as well. Like I won my talent show at Desk the year that I left, and so I always loved arts, business, showbiz, music. What I had no idea about was mental health, so I never actually had it in my mind. And then I came here, and I couldn't settle. It was the hardest thing ever. And I don't think a lot of people really understand. Yeah, you could be someone that could speak English. Yeah, you could be someone that لفيت العالم, you've been around the world. But living somewhere, like living literally in the heart of downtown Toronto, and not feeling like you belong, or
Mm.
feeling super uh, homesick, or whatever that may be, is a very different feeling, because the culture is different. I was raised on playing football. I didn't even know basketball rules. I didn't know how to connect. I wasn't the type of guy that would watch hockey nights. Like I just couldn't connect with just basic friendships,
Yeah.
and connection is so important. So that's when I really took a very deep downfall, and that's when I got really really scared about what mental health is, because I was experiencing what I now know was clinical depression, and it was just the worst thing ever. But and when I had no one to look up to, I was like, I need to take on this mission just as competitively and ferociously as I did with all my sports and all my other endeavors. So that's why I do what I do today, and I've now launched, Empower magazine, which is the Middle East's first mental health magazine, for the past year and a bit now. I think we have around 100,000 hits
Oh,
since
wow.
we've launched. Yeah, reads on the magazine. It's all organic ever since we started. Of course, it's not sustainable, so I'm in a phase where I'm looking at what I can do right now, whether it's a mental health show or whether it's something that can actually have a proper business model and a revenue generating system, other than just depending on ads, which I'm not really a big fan of.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's really a little bit about myself. I can talk about about that for ages, but I probably you have. I want to make sure we're steering in the right directions here.
Sure. No, I appreciate that, and thank you for giving us that intro. I think so. When I was doing my research about you, and from the conversations I've had with people on the podcast surrounding mental health, everyone who's passionate about it has gone through their own mental health struggles, their own journey of mental health and understanding themselves and so on. And for you, what was interesting is that the you were diagnosed with clinical depression, but it came from a place that I didn't expect it to come from, honestly, and which was the feeling of that you didn't belong where you're living now in Toronto in Canada, and that you struggle to connect with people. So, for the people who don't know, and because Dr. Nasser on the episode that you had described, he's a 40 guys. For the people who don't know, he's a psychiatrist with 40 years experience. He's one of the most renowned, I believe, in Cairo, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. He's actually the World Federation for Mental Health president elect. Like
Oh wow.
he's
Okay.
like one of the most renowned Arab mental health professionals in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that he said that was super interesting was because go check out the episode, guys. But basically, he got COVID and he experienced depression himself. And what he said was, even with his 40 years of experience in the in like psychiatry and so on, he didn't understand depression until he went through it himself. No matter how many books he read, no matter all his experience, he didn't understand, how that actually feels to be going through, like to be depressed. So I thought it'd be interesting for you to, if you could just walk us through, Ali, what were you, when you were in that, that phase of your life, what were you thinking about? What were the what were the feelings that were coming up, and how did you start addressing that and like making the changes to get to where you are now?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Yani, for mentioning this episode. I'll definitely shoot you a link, and it's on Empathy Always Wins, my podcast. Yeah, I think that it's so important to have these conversations. So thank you for shouting it out. Going back to your question on how does it feel, and really, Yani, walk us through maybe a, a day, or walk us through an experience. I think in very simple terms, it's uh it's something unfathomable in a way that it's the experience that is very different from being lazy. It's when your brain chemicals do not produce enough, endorphins and the chemicals that allow you to function normally, and you start to typically experience high levels of anxiety, which is different from stress. Anxiety is when you overthink everything, from like, what pants am I gonna wear? Is someone gonna see the stain? But like, and you were never this person that cared about anything, and so you overthink everything. You start to worry, did I lock my, and you can't continue functioning in in that present moment in your day to day because of all the thoughts that cripple your mind.
Mm,
So that it starts typically with that. It starts typically with a roaring sense of يعني, uncertainty around your mind. And when your mind starts to feel whack, like you don't know what's happening inside, it's kind of like crisis mode. It's danger. It's
mm,
a danger zone. And so you start to really feel depleted, and you start to really feel like you can't pick up phone calls. And so you start to really feel like you can't reply to this person. You start to really feel like you can't put that same amount of energy when you thought that, wow, like, what's going on here? Like, and then you start to feel like it's druggy waking up, and then you start to feel like, you want to live in your own isolated world. And it's not because you want other people to feel like they're not enough. No, it's you just can't give people, because you can't give yourself. And unfortunately, sometimes it gets even more burdensome when people keep hitting you up. Hey, are you okay? Are you okay? And you just, that even pisses you off even more, because you're overthinking that,
mm,
and that becomes a point of crisis in your mind. What are people thinking? Oh my god. And it's like mental health, like, I'm supposed to be that strong person, and like it starts to mess you up. And unfortunately, yeah, I just didn't quite understand, because to me, like, I grew up in in Egypt, and or in Dubai, and like, to be strong is a very different notion
definition.
than,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very different definition. Like, what the hell? Like, this is supposed to be easy, and no one would understand it. But I think because of the lack of education we have, and a lot of things that we don't really put into consideration when we are growing up and developing understanding. And a reason I called my show Empathy Always Wins is because that's a key skill set that we, the as Arab, or as just minority community, even Bangladesh, Indian, Pakistani, not just Arab, just anyone who's anyone who isn't Western, anyone who isn't Caucasian, they don't really understand it much because we're very close to each other. So we're always used to being in other people's and others' business and blah blah blah. Uh, but when we start to think about those questions, well, what if this person is? We start to really develop better emotional intelligence and better leadership skills, and we start to really empower people in a much more sustainable manner. And I think that, at our root core, in our Arabic, in our philosophy, or in our religions, or in our whatever, this is there. But culture is very different from religion, and it's
100%.
very important to know that our culture in the Middle East is sometimes a big factor in keeping our mental health a little bit unstable, because sometimes we don't give the space, we don't give people what they need to truly develop into their own selves. Because when we have kids, we don't own them. We, as much as we try to control them, uh, you know parents need to understand, and parenting with influence is much better than parenting with control. And those are all the different topics that I truly uptake and empower, because it's supposed to be aimed at the 18 to 27, 28-year old youth that is growing up and starting to experience a world that is so different to their parents and their and everyone in their family. Because the rate of change in society today is so much different than the rate of change in society in our parents' generation. Like, I think a day ago I shared something on my Facebook. Like, all the technologies that used to be, antiques in someone's home are now in a 4 by 5 inch technology in your pocket. Like, what's going on? We never had that many distractions happening. Our minds are not designed for that. So no, like, no shit, we're gonna experience anxiety.
Yeah. Uh, First of all, thanks so much for sharing your story about like the process that you went through and how that actually started to develop and where it came from. I didn't know, just on that small part. How long did was that like phase from when you started like feeling that anxiety and those thoughts about like your shirt or like this or that till like maybe your lowest point? Did it spiral really quickly out of control, or did it take some time, or was it over a long period of time? What would you say?
I would say that definitely 3 years,
Three
for sure.
years.
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean,
Okay.
I've been here for 6 years now, and I've started to only make friends last year. Like,
Wow.
I couldn't actually, merge into society. And that's the thing. People, I was just, as I told you off the record, I had a friend over yesterday, and we were watching we were watching a cool movie, and and I was like, dude, you know that, like, I've only been able to do this with you, um, only. Like, I don't have anything outside of this except for maybe one other friend, and we don't do this. I just do something else with this friend that is much more music related.
Mm,
He was like, really? I was like, yeah, you've been 6 years. And I was telling him that, well, that's exactly why I do Empower, man, because all that I've been through did not allow me to feel like I could have friends. And so that's an illness. I mean, that's an illness. It's just people don't, if I was in hospital, if I was in another place, whatever debilitates you from living an ordinary life. And I know there's no such thing as ordinary, but I mean, by ordinary, I mean by having people that you rely on, close friends. When you meet someone and they tell you, oh, I don't have friends, or I don't rely on people, or I don't have a support system to call if I need any support, then there's something definitely wrong with this person, or
mm,
there's something fundamentally wrong with their beliefs, or not so, something's not going well,
yeah.
because we are meant to wire. So that's exactly what I was going through. And I think that made me realize how important, or why I do what I do. So I think, Yani, if anything, I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, no, it really does, man. And I love the passion that you talk about when you're like speaking about this. I can see it on your face and how you're talking about what you went through and to get to where you are now is I commend you, honestly. And anyone who's gone through their own mental health journey and has reached a new phase in their life and is doing the kind of work that you're doing, being an advocate for mental health and an ambassador, I think that's pretty amazing. So congratulations on that, because I know it's not easy.
Mhm.
I wanted to come to how did so for the people who don't know, you are the mental health ambassador to the Middle East,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. So walk us through that journey to go from like 6 years ago being where you were to here you are now as a mental health ambassador. I think that's pretty awesome. So walk us through what that is. How did you get there, and like what does that mean? What does that role entail for you?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I essentially I have a business degree. I have a business degree in entrepreneurship and innovation at Ryerson University, and a big part of my degree was to, test and iterate ideas and make sure that this degree is revolutionary in the sense that entrepreneurship isn't now a isn't now it's not a guessing game. It's a science, and even though it's a bachelor's of commerce, during what I was going through, the only thing that made sense to me was to, actually, put a Google form out, go and test whether I was the only crazy person like who was feeling this, because I'd never heard anyone talk about mental health. I actually didn't really, I wasn't a believer in mental health before. I would be the guy making fun of people being weak because I was apparently thinking myself I was very strong. Which a lot of us Arabs, we do. We're like we're always
100%.
in wars. We're always in wars. We're always wanting to flex, and I'm cool with that. I mean, I've gotten to a point where, yeah, I've agreed that there's nothing wrong with admitting that you might be at fault. But so yeah, one thing that made me realize what we needed to do during my program was when I was going through this experience, I put up a Google form and it went absolutely viral in Egypt. It was share your story anonymously, break the silence, Egypt, and like overnight I got over 100 and more than 170 essays of people that were writing their deepest, darkest secrets without their name on it.
Wow.
And I was getting people who were molested when they were kids and now unable to have any form of sexual experience, or like they were second guessing themselves, girls that were every single thing that you could possibly imagine in that form. We're talking about family, uh, stuff that happens in the family that you would not never expect, uncles and all the stuff that you hear in the Arab world that goes under the rug. And I'm not here to criticize my Arabic culture. I actually love being Arab. I love being Egyptian. But what I sometimes really don't like, and what I learned from this experiment, and why Empower became, and why I decided to stand up, was someone had to, relate. Someone had to step up and say, يعني, لا, يعني, what this person is saying is like legit. Like there's a difference between knowing something and acting upon something. Knowing something is knowing things happen. Acting upon something is being a voice to the voiceless. And that's what I've decided to do. I've just decided to speak up. Like I know there are like there are things that are not right happening, and it made me understand. It made me empathize with, and not just say, oh, 25% of Egyptians are going through a mental health disorder. No, like, what are the mental health disorders? Now, from my experience, I'm able to say, like, oh yeah, marriages are being broken, not because of just poor relationships in the bedroom. No, it's because of poor communication. It's because of people not being able to have the intake to understand what it means to have a different type of responsibility. It's because of the culture in our in our part of the region that spends so much on getting prepared and hyping things up, that there is no meetings of the mind, which over here people typically have, and that enables longevity in a relationship. All these things that do not allow for a healthy relationship to happen leads, for example, to that. And perhaps now I understand that a lot because of the sexual harassment cases that I really got into. And my friend who was featured on the New York Times, Nadine Ashraf, who made Assault Police, I think in 1 week she got over 270,000 followers, which happened through a
Wow.
major case in Egypt. Yeah, we got to understand how women feel about sexual harassments, and how they are super against being in relationships and communicating in certain ways, and their lack of trust in men. All these factors play a huge role in women in the workplace, women in blah blah blah. You get to understand, and when you speak on like panels and on podcasts like this, you are able to communicate that the struggle isn't a gender struggle. It's a literacy struggle. It's an educational struggle. And being the person that I am as an ambassador, I actually, yani, after doing Empower, after Harvard, ranking us as the top 7 most impactful in the region, I actually decided to give that title to myself, just because when I go anywhere in the Middle East, I'm able to say, hey, like, look, this is what needs to be done. Because knowing the amount of data, being asked to sit on youth advisory boards by the World Health Organization, or all these things, I realized that we have nobody talking on mental health. We have no point of reference, and not from a psychological standpoint, from a sociological standpoint, from a society standpoint, because that is so much more powerful than a doctor speaking. And Dr. Nasser actually brought me to the World Health Organization in summer 2019, and that's when I realized that someone who has a lived experience is 10 times more powerful in terms of spreading a message. I'm not saying in terms of actually having a therapy, or in terms of actually having treatment, or
Yeah.
diagnosing, or practicing delivering a service. No, I mean it from a storytelling standpoint. And he
Mm.
brought like 90, I think that World Health Organization workshop had 90 Arab journalists. And I was chilling with them for 3 days in Sharm el Sheikh. And on the last day, I stood up, and they all thought like I was Dr. Nasser's son, or like I was like, his whatever. Because me and Nasser are like very, very, very close. He's guided me, like he's my mentor. He's guided me through the whole process. Um, when I stood up to speak on the third day, I was this guy who was cracking jokes with them, eating with them. It was a whole thing at the hotel and the conference sort of room. And on the third day, when I stood up and spoke, they were like, "Are you serious? Like, we've been writing about people like you, and we thought that they would never have a future, or they should be
Mm.
like blacklisted from society and all these things. And here you are." Like, there's definitely, and that's why I think that's the most powerful thing that I realized in the work that I do. It's not just breaking stigmas, because that's just like a very, very mainstream thing. Oh, let's break the stigma, let's end it. No, it's like when someone says that to me, I just tell them shut up. I'm all about empowering people, and empowering people to understand that there's more than just the surface.
Yeah.
There's more than what we see.
Yeah. I think something you said that is super interesting and something I didn't consider before, which is you mentioned 3 key things, which I think are super important in the work you're doing, and why maybe in our part of the world, like you said, in our society, of course, I love the Arab culture, but listen, there's no such thing as a perfect culture. Each culture has its own problems and its own things. In ours, it's not, strength is not showing, not showing emotion. Strength is, not like speaking about certain things. You're not allowed to speak about that. You're not allowed to feel. You're not even allowed to feel that sometimes. So the things you talked about education, literacy, and communication, I think those 3 are so key to make any long lasting change, because like you said, it's great to bring the awareness, but if you're not implementing the right tools or processes to start making those changes, it's just more information, it's just more noise, it's more noise for you. You're not going to really take that in, understand it, and start to implement it. So on that point, how do we start in the work that you do, what's the process look like to start going from awareness to actionable change? What does that look like? Because you can go like give a speech, like you said, give a keynote, you can bring that awareness, but then how do we start translating that into some actionable steps to start changing, society and like businesses, whatever the case might be, or start having that conversation?
That's a great question, Khalil. I don't think like any Arab person has ever asked me this question. So this is a very, very, very good question. I think that the way to actually start acting is by enforcing, uh, whether it's in schools, whether it's in the workplace, mental health workplace initiatives, which allow people to space to feel, or allow people space to learn, or allow people space to become better leaders. There's a reason why, like, when I came up with the show, Masan Empathy Always Wins, it's not just a mental health show. No, no, no. It's meant for business leaders and it's meant for people like us. It's meant to showcase the importance of having emotional intelligence. So, and the efforts to educate people on mental health shouldn't just be on depression, anxiety, mood disorders, psychotic disorders, schizophrenia, blah blah. No, 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 no. That's like turning people off from the entire topic. Mental well-being and mental health is a spectrum. It's from thriving to absolutely like barely surviving. So on that spectrum, you have uh, so many different levels and so many different scopes. Whether you're, and people need to understand that um, that feelings have words to them. So sometimes I believe we only use maybe around 10 ways to describe how we feel all the time. Like, is like, oh, أنا كويس. Like, how are you? I'm fine. But no, there's I can't remember what it's called. It's the wheel of something. I have
Yes,
to
yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
understanding how to express is a form of 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 art by itself, and that enhances people's leadership skills, whether it be in the workplace or in schools. There must be, in English schools or British schools, we have PSHE, personal learning. I think it was personal health or something like that. It's where people learn about sex education and all these things. I think it's very important in schools to have a class that teaches them about their well-being, that teaches them about their emotional responses. If people want to, live in a time, especially during these times today, where students are going to achieve better, they need to understand what the lifestyle of a student looks like, or what the lifestyle of a working professional looks like, with all the distractions around us, and how can you make your employee or your student's life beyond your workplace the best that it, like, how can you enhance their emotional intelligence or mental health intellect, so that they can perform better, and they can, you can, if you're selfish, this will work for you. If you're selfless, this will work for you too. It's how you think about it. So if you want your company to succeed, you need to be able to care for the people that are working there. And how do you care for them? It's not just by giving them days off, because people will take days off regardless if you have a mental health workplace initiative or not. Because nowadays we're seeing that most days taken off are due to work stress related issues. That so if you might as well had transparency, then people would feel a little bit safer. All these things will make someone, when you implement them in an org or in a school or in any institution, feel a bit safer, for them to feel more human in a world
Mm.
where like inhumane demands are being thrown at us. So it's about making someone feel safe in their workplace environment, and that requires budgets, and that requires people, forward thinking people, taking action. And you know what, the programs are here. Like, I work very closely with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It's one of the leading boards in terms of finding evidence-based research and programs, and putting them together and just selling them to the world at at prices that are reasonable, because they're a government organization. But it's not hard to implement. It's just who is willing to
Mm.
take the first step, and who's willing to be a pioneer in that stage. And this is why I've decided to really work in speaking, and work to consult more, because that is where I find more of the impact, rather than yeah.
Yeah, more of the impact. No, 100%. And I think something you said that was, I think the whole initiative idea is great. And like you said, because it needs to start in businesses. But the interesting part that you talk about that I didn't consider is the schools. Because I think, like you correctly said, we weren't, like, growing up, we didn't know what something called emotional intelligence is. We didn't know that, didn't even exist in our world. Like, we didn't know about how to think, how to understand our emotions, how to do all that. So on the school part, I think it's super useful, because if from a young age you're taught these things and have these tools and develop this awareness and have a better emotional intelligence and understanding of yourself, think about, you're kind of like, you're building, or like, the next generation of people who actually know about this stuff, are passionate about this stuff, and then you have like the exponential effect as time goes on, because those people will then teach their kids, and so on and so on and so on. So I think the school aspect is super useful. And one thing you said in your intro on the podcast was helping leaders or changing the perspective of leaders to care more about people than profits. And I think that was such an amazing way to say it, because like you said, nowadays profit is always, the number one thing. And you said correctly, most people take days off because of mental health issues. Myself, I've gone through mental health struggles at work, and my performance dipped, all that dipped. So I took days off because I just couldn't work. Didn't have the motivation. I wasn't in the right headspace. So I think both those initiatives, particularly the school one, I think would be super useful. And it makes sense that you're consulting, because that's where you have the direct impact. It's not just speaking at an event. That's where you can go in and understand and speak to people and like change thought leadership. I wanted to come on to, you said, because I remember you said you spoke at you've spoken at the World Health Organization with youth programs and so on. And something I was thinking about is, from the conversations you've had, because you've had a conversation with so many different people and different cultures and so on, what does the mental health conversation look like on a global scale? And what I mean is, for example, from an Arab perspective, we think about mental health in a certain way, but India might think of it in that way. China might have a different perspective. So what have you learned on like an international scale about the differences that different cultures, how they perceive mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the Arab culture, people think, mental health as they really tie it to religion a lot of the times. A lot of the times people tie it to, things that are lacking due to, a lack of closeness to God, or people tie all the devil stuff. You need to go to, a sheikh to have a reading on you to cleanse your soul, all these things. And those are still very real. I mean, it's just not in maybe the upper class, but like, we don't, what we don't see, we can't neglect, because this still happens. So the conversation starts from usually there when something is wrong or when something is very off. I think it's very hard to accept sometimes that it's okay not to be okay. And I know
Okay.
this statement is like very, very, very overused, but it's very hard for an Arab, Egyptian, Emirati, Saudi to accept that his daughter or his son may have a mood disorder and that they need a little bit more attention. I think it's much more easier for them to think that they're born with a defect than expect than put a name of a mental health disorder on them and be okay with that. It's just seen as a little bit of a shame, unfortunately.
Mm.
And that's the same for all minority cultures. In the West, of course, there's a little bit of tolerance because there's a little bit more education and there's more room, and there's more budgeting, and there's a lot more consideration, which is essentially what we were saying in the other question before, or in the other segment that we were having. So you know if we come to see, for example, how autistic people here are treated, people with autism in Canada and even in the UAE now. The UAE is I think the world leader, the Arab world leader in taking steps forward. But back in the day, and not too long ago, we used to hit them, and we used to try to control them, and really try to do it that by force. Unfortunately, that metaphor can be used on mental health as a whole, with us as a population. So there's no longer it's no longer a force game. It's more of an impact game. And the people who are going to take action quicker are the companies that are truly going to see the best retentions on everything, on workplace absenteeism, on profits, on employee satisfaction. And that's going to be a word of mouth too. You'll hear that before it even gets onto the reports, because you can't fake energy, and you can't fake people when they're happy, or when they're seeing change being made in the direction that they truly have always wanted to see change being.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you mentioned. And two things that really stuck out was when you spoke about how in minority cultures there's, and in like the difference between minority cultures and, for example, like Western cultures, like you were talking about, is two things that really stood out: is consideration, one, to actually be more accepting of that, and number two is the education. I think that's the bedrock of everything we've spoken about today regarding mental health, is that education in so many parts of the world. And why this is such a big issue and why it's so important to have these conversations is to educate people on the importance of this and why we need to be having these discussions. And that brings me on to Empower and your magazine, and I know you guys have like I read an article online actually, one of your articles surrounding social media that was very very interesting, talking about opinions and being in the social light and how social pressure can influence your decision and so on. But I wanted to ask you, because online we both know there's so many outlets for learning about like mental health and like classes and tools and so on. So in your own words, I was curious, what do you feel is different about Empower? What makes you guys unique? And what do you think?
I think it's just youth writing for youth. I think that
Okay.
the most important thing is that, you know, um, and that's something I also want to say, and it's something that I truly believe. Yani, it's why I love supporting anyone who's young. Um, and I consider us being young in a global scheme of the professional world. Um, I've had so many people reach out to me, and we do have very good psychologists in the MENA region, and we have professionals. But it's very different when you have an issue when you're young, sitting next to someone who you maybe think is very similar to in age to your mom,
Mm,
or you don't relate to. You want someone who feels you, who understands what it's like growing up in an environment that it's texting is the norm, or certain yani, how could I say it, certain things that you can relate to on a sub professional level. Because at the end of the day, you can have the best therapist in the world. You can't connect, you can't connect. That's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So youth always want to speak in a manner that it's educational, that gets to the point, but that also is relatable to them. And that's the only difference. That's the only difference. Youth empowering youth.
youth empowering youth. I think I didn't consider that point, to be honest. And I think something mentioned that's super interesting is the relatability, because people, like especially with youth, you're relating to someone who's going through the same things, who understands what you're going through, and who communicates in the same way that you do. So you can be like, oh yeah, he's like me, that's fine, I can have this conversation. But like, I think the age gap that you talked about is super, it's a very important to take into consideration, because that it needs to start from the ground up, like from youth, and you build that upwards. Because if you can start addressing these things, the younger you start addressing these things, the much better you're going to be in the long term, and the more people I think you'll be able to potentially help as well. I wanted to come on to the social media part that I just mentioned briefly. And in your work, how have you seen the impact of social media on mental health? Because we know there have been studies, and that documentary came out, The Social Dilemma, on Netflix, and that just blew my mind on how powerful this stuff is and how much it really changes our perspective. So from the work you've done, what have you found to be, what are the findings that you found regarding social media and like mental health?
Look, I think social media is a great tool, but unfortunately, many people are using it to make a career out of it, which is like ridiculous. Because if you're making a career out of being likable on a second to second basis, you're doomed to be the most depressed person in the world. Like that's just the way it is. You lose yourself. You're always after numbers. Your self-esteem, your worth is completely after, based on eyeballs. I mean, you become a billboard. I mean, that is where I disagree with social media being how it can be used. But if you're using as a tool, as a way to supplement your message, or as a way to supplement anything that you do, that's the most beautiful way you can use it. But unfortunately, people are seeing that other people are getting access to things, influencers, and unfortunately, it is a time that is scary for many people that do not see beyond that. And unfortunately, in the day and age that we live in, this instantly gratifying age, we need to understand that some people do not see beyond 5 years. They do not see what a career means. They just see what they believe that is possible because they want to feel a certain feeling. Because with social media, we also have so many people living in isolated worlds that are farther apart than ever before. So if and that goes again to what I'm saying. It goes, if you use it as a tool more so as a way to build your career. If you're building your career on social media, uh, as this to be the prime revenue of source, you eat, you sleep, you're feeding yourself off of it. It's super dangerous, very dangerous. So that's my take on it, and I believe that it's a great tool. I just believe that it's designed to make us. It's designed actually to mimic the way drugs drugs elicitate chemicals in your mind. So the more you're spending time on it, the more hooked you are on it, the more you get disassociated with reality, because this is not reality. And the more you think in terms of this currency, which is the social media currency, the more you think of it, the more you think of life in that currency, the more you get consumed in that, and you forget, what does it feel like to be present? What does it feel like to take a breath and not feel like I want to snap this so that everyone can see it, so that I have more numbers? We're not meant to be robots, my friend. We're meant to be. But I know people who feel like that and who are always thinking as a. So again, think like an entrepreneur, but if you're thinking like an entrepreneur within the social like influencer realm, it is the recipe for ultimate failure. And that is not the technology's fault, that is the user's fault. And that's part of emotionally being intelligent and wise. And this is a part of a program that if a school ever had with regards to mental health, it needs to teach that, because those technologies are only going to get stronger, uh, better, faster, 5G. So we just have to be smarter, wiser, and not slaves to the technology that will inevitably ruin our minds
Yeah,
if we
I,
don't take it.
yeah, no, 100%. I think you, first of all, saying that with the school aspect, having mental health regarding social media in school is super important, because I have a younger sister, she's 16, and I see how like their lives on the phone. Like you take the phone away, life is over. That's it. So it perfectly talks about what you're talking about, and it's all of them. Like everyone in her generation, that's how it is. They're so addicted to their phones. But what you also said that was interesting about social media, and which I totally agree, is it trains, like you said, there is a drug. That like when you get that like, it feels that dopamine thing, like, oh, I feel good. Okay, cool. And it just keeps building like that. And it makes your gratification, like you said, instant. So I need it to, if I don't get it now, I start feeling upset. And it starts hindering your thinking from going short term to long term. And also that all your self-worth and what makes you happy and what you think about yourself is now all coming externally. It's all external validation. So I didn't get the likes, oh, I must be bad, I must be ugly, I must be not enough, whatever the case might be. So it, like you said, it is a tool, and there's, with any tool, can be used in the right way or the wrong way. So, and also having it as your prime source as of income is probably not the best idea, because I also think about, when I think about influence and so on, I'm like, what if Instagram goes tomorrow? What do you do then? Like, what's the next? What's your next move? There isn't a next move, and that's the problem. It traps you in that world. Would you agree with that?
100%, 100%.
Yeah, I know, man. I think the point you mentioned about like using it in the right way and the instant gratification is so true and so useful. But like you said, if you use it correctly, it can be a huge push. It can be a huge push for us, moving forward. So yeah, Ali, like we were talking about, I wanted to get on to your podcast, Empathy Always Wins. And I heard your episode with Dr. Nasser, and I thought it was really interesting, man. And I thought you guys had some very good questions for him. And one thing I was thinking about, so the name, first of all, I love the name. I think empathy is super important. But this is the thing I was thinking about. I'm like, empathy is important, and yes, it does always win. But do you think there's a limit to empathy? Do you think there's like, let's say there's like a spectrum, like I can empathize with you till a certain point, and then it gets to a point that I just, I can't anymore. It doesn't feel, it'd be wrong to maybe do that. What do you think? Do you think there's a limit to empathy?
Of course, you're absolutely right. And I think that it's does it really always win? Is that the question? So of course, like it doesn't always win, but uh, seeing where we are in the world, it always wins. Just because we aren't empathetic, so it's more of a statement rather than uh, it's more of a thing to catch you off guard rather than a clear cut, point blank statement that I'm making. But of course, empathy, just like anything else, if it if you're overutilizing it, if you're being overly empathetic with somebody, then you're gonna actually break your boundary that you are supposed to set with people, because not everybody is supposed to you're not supposed to heal everybody. That's not your job. not even as a leader. You're supposed to empower them. And that's why, you know, that's why we have mental illness. Mental illness is very, I know you listened to Dr. Nasser's episode. It's very irrational. It's very different to physical illness, because it doesn't make, it's the only illness that you don't want to get better from. And to the rational mind, to the healthy mind listening to us, it's different from breaking an arm and wanting to feel that you can stretch it now and you can feel your hands and thumbs and fingers. Mental illness isn't like that. No, no, no. But I was saying empathy is different, because it's you can't jump into someone's boat when they are like that and expect to help them out, because sometimes you can't really help someone out, and it's not your job. So again, does it always win? For the leaders and managers, it will make them so much more personal and respected a ton more, because when you're personal, when you ask the question, hey, I realized, I know that it was your kid's football game yesterday, how did that go? you're you're seeking a much deeper connection than how did our report go yesterday? Did you manage to finish the last section that we spoke about? Oh, and your kid, man, did your kid end up scoring that goal that you wanted him to score for that match that was completely off related to work, but that bonds him to you more, because you're not just working, you're personal. It's kind of like, we're family. We're not just, my interest isn't just in your business.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point, man. And I think, like you said, there is a limit to empathy, but on the larger scale, that's how, whether it's in business, whether it's personal relationships, whatever the case might be, any relationship, that is what opens the door to a deeper connection. And that's what opens the door to a much better, understanding. And I like the example that you said, it becomes more personal. And at the end of the day, you're like, it's people dealing with people. So everyone has their own like shit. Everyone has their own stuff they're going through, their own challenges that we might not be aware of. So giving themselves that extra bit of compassion, I think in the long run is always more beneficial. In your life, is there an example you have where where this empathy always wins kind of like rings true? Do you have an example of that?
100%. And we
Okay.
just spoke about it like off record with Nasser. So at Harvard,
Okay.
that I met. So just for a reference, I went to Harvard last year, and it was just after launching Empower magazine. I received a DM on my Instagram from a friend of mine telling me, hey, you cannot miss this event. I was like, what is this event? I soon realized that there's Harvard's putting an Arab mental health panel. Like, holy cow, like, wow, wow, wow. So I was like, okay, I need to go there. Uh, Little did I know that this mental health keynote speaker was the World Federation for Mental Health president-elect. And this person is an honorary member in the British Royal Psychiatry. I mean, there's so many things that I can't even remember about this guy, but he's very, very renowned in what he does. And so I went there. And of course, when we say empathy always wins, and when we come to really take action on everything that sort of this podcast is about, being emotionally intelligent, how do you present yourself, and all these things, just, a real life example was me meeting him and just talking very openly and in a very vulnerable manner. I'm not here to just say, oh, I really enjoyed what you said on the panel. Like, do a little bit of research behind his life events. And it's exactly what you're doing. And that's why off the record, I said that, like, you're one of the most, I've enjoyed my time sort of more with you than any other podcast, because you've actually taken you've taken the steps to really dig into questions that are more personal about my why. So when I did that with Nasser, just as you did that with me, it ended up being a bond that made me fly to the World Health Organization, opened all the doors right now for me, and it made me become, a spokesperson for mental health in the Middle East as a young Arab man. And now when I go to Nasser, I actually, in Egypt, it's not work at all. It's personal. I sleep over at his place. I speak at his hospital, which is the Behman Hospital. It's the largest private mental health institution in the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
and my friends interned there. My friends in the school that I was brought up uh, in, and this is we're talking about a school the president's grandson was in. And when I was giving the talk there, and they're like, Ali, what? How'd you? No, we never see him come out of his office. I responded, I was sleeping over at his place. We were having a great time. So talk about empathy always winning in that sense. It does. And just by being real, raw, and authentic, you build connections. And offline, it will you will feel it more, because this is truly when the action, or it's truly when you walk the walk. You don't walk the talk, you walk the walk. And I always say that.
Yeah, nah, man, that's such a good story and a beautiful example of empathy always winning. And thank you very much for the kind words, man. I really appreciate it. Like you said, I think it's putting in that extra work to have the opportunity to have these deeper connections, like the one you, for example, that you have with Dr. Nasser. You did your research, you did that, and that is what you care. It's that's where it comes from, is to be cared, to be curious, to want to really connect with this person. That's what it takes. And to be willing to be, I think, vulnerable as well is also a big thing, because that invites other people to be vulnerable with you and to have a better connection as well. So I totally agree. That's an awesome story, man.
Thank
And
you.
Dr. Nasser said on your podcast, which I thought was very interesting. He's like, my biggest fear is not dying. He's like, my biggest fear when when I was diagnosed with corona and I was going through depression, was looking back at my life and thinking, did I not do enough? Did I not have the impact that I wanted to have on this world, given everything I've done? And he's like, that was my biggest fear. So let me ask you, Ali, what would you, I know you're still quite young, so there's a long road ahead, but what is the impact that you would like to have, like, in your time here?
Yeah, that's a question. um, Definitely the biggest impact that I am working now towards is revolutionizing what it means to be diagnosed, to to talk about mental health. I want to make mental health cool. I want to make, you know, um, and again, don't take this the wrong way, but I really look up to a guy that many people may know of. He's called Hugh Hefner. He was the guy that
Okay.
he was the
Okay.
guy that revolutionized. I'm a big fan of his story. Maybe not like, maybe not his lifestyle, but the story. He was the first person to, at the time, Playboy rise to become the magazine for men in the U.S. What happened was he was working for Esquire, and then he didn't see the change that Esquire was that he could make. So he actually went, and then within, I think, 4 years, he became the number one and beat Esquire because they didn't give him a $5 raise, and they were. This is just a really good story. But how that relates to sort of where I see myself with the change is, I see the mental health institutions, I see what people are doing, but I don't see the action being taken. I don't see a voice being spoken. Um, I don't see the normalization of of a lifestyle where happiness is the core center uh, driver. I see a lifestyle where things are leading us to be very sad. So I think, if you tell me, Ali, what is your end goal, or if you look back, what is this that you want to change? I'll tell you that I definitely want to be a pioneer in standing up and using my voice, and being the guy that, when I perhaps was going through a very bad depressive phase, to be like, yes, this is someone I relate to, and because of him I see hope. So whether that be on a stage talking to thousands, or whether that I sing as well. So I've always wanted to have a creative message, and not just a workplace consultant guy. I always want to adopt the Tony Robbins version of spreading a message on a stage, in an office with high performers. And that's why, off the record, I was talking to you about coaching as well. It's something that I really um, uh, high performance coaching. It's something that I really want to get into. But more so for now, it's seriously starting at point zero, which is getting out and speaking on behalf of youth, and on behalf of what we need to see that needs to happen for us to have a future that we can at least be talking in a language where other people, I mean, the mature people understand us in the workplace, so that we're not being forced to do things in a world where we see it differently. And companies are now adjusting to that with the social causes, and everything's changing. But we just need to understand the importance of not feeling scared to talk about uh, not just feelings and emotions, but our mental and psyche. Because not going out or not being able to work because of a concurrent issue that is affecting your psychology is just as important as not being able to work because of an injury or a car crash that hit you. Like the productivity, talking from a business standpoint, and that's what really isn't said out loud, the losses are the same. So why aren't we giving that a little bit more light? That's what I want to be able to bring to the Middle East, and as a youth leader into the world. I think that we need to be able to allow people to feel and be themselves, and not use loopholes in systems, because that will only lead to insustainability on the long run.
Yeah, man, that's a beautiful vision, and I love it. And something you said earlier in our conversation was, and kind of relates to what you're saying now, is you want to be giving a voice to the voiceless. Like I love that, and I think with all the work you're doing and where you're going, and already the things you've already done, man, you're in a very good spot to achieve, what you're trying to achieve. And I love the vision behind it. And like you said, it's making so people aren't scared to talk about their emotions, talk about their mental health. And like you correctly said, like in all aspects of life, whether it's work or whatever, your mental health is kind of like mental health is kind of like a physical health. Literally just as important. Like you said, like if I'm injured, okay, maybe I can't go to work. There's like losses there. But if I'm not mentally there, if anything, that's more important, because the physical pain is just, with time, it's going to heal. But like a mental one, there's no time on it. And unless we start having these conversations and giving, like you said, giving people hope to be able to relate to us and to see some potential in the future, it's not like you can't. It needs to be the priority. It needs to be at the forefront of every conversation. And the way the world's moving now, I think, is towards that. So I am hopeful of that. I don't think it's going to be overnight, but I think everything's moving in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, you're right, and I think it's also important to know that we all have traumas inside of us. Like no one's 100%. So I feel it's we have to live in a, yeah. Just to wrap things up, I feel like we have to live in a society where we understand that we are all here, not just together to help each other, but healing is part of what we need to pursue. This self development or this growth, a big part of it is self-awareness, and a big part of it is understanding what what we weren't given as young children, or what has hurt us, or what we're scared of. And I think that in itself is a big step for our culture, because we will then be able to deal with things the right way. Because if you can't, imagine if you have something physical, and you can't put you can't diagnose it right, it will keep biting you over and over again. So the only reason why we keep suffering in our region is because we are not facing what we our traumas, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's the security of our lands, whatever it is, just being okay with understanding that we maybe not be 100%, but we're going to work towards it. That's where we need to start, at point A. And the reform or the change will definitely take time, but the mindset, it's all about the mindset. And especially for Arab men who are technically in power for many or most countries, this is where we need to be more active, and we need to be able to not say this message in a repulsive way, but explain the message and deliver the message in a strong, empowering, and in a transformative way, in a way that allows someone who isn't feeling maybe so great not want to fight you, but want to work with you, because he sees himself, he sees a positive benefit in it. and when it comes to mental health, we're so scared. There's a negative association, but if we don't fight that negative association, if we work with it and transform it into a positive, this is why I truly believe yani is the way forward. And I think with the podcast, yani with what you're doing, it's a great first step um, for many people who want to help this message, or for many people that who want to help the region take the direction in the right or steer the boat in the right direction. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure, man, honestly. And I love what you said about, it's a not not fighting it and looking at it as negative, but rather working with it, not against it, and transforming that message and developing that new mindset. And I think at the end of the day, like you said, mindset is everything. And that's the key that's gonna, whatever happens next or whatever, for this to move forward, for mental health to move forward together in the world, it's all about just changing that mindset, changing that perspective, and then the change will come. So I totally agree, man. And one thing that your friends, I think one of your friends quotes, and I love that. I've never heard it before, but I resonated with it so much, is there's no better marketing than caring. And I thought that was just like perfect, and it really like spoke to me, and it really like resonated with me. So, and that's, I can clearly see that's what you're doing too, and it comes from that kind of place. So awesome job on what you've done too, man. It's been awesome. And thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaled. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, man. And as I always ask all my guests, what's the last message that you'd like people to take home with them today?
Yeah, I definitely would love to say sometimes we see many people that we love hurting, like very deeply. We find ourselves like unable to help them because, it's a bigger, bigger problem that we can handle. It's something that we feel useless being next to them, not knowing what to do. The only thing I would love to say for anyone who has someone they love going through a very tough time, regardless of what it is just listen to them. Uh, Allow them space. Sometimes we want to jump right into fixing people, that we forget that giving people space to rant and listen is a form of healing in itself. So that's the last message I want to say. And I build all my like close brotherly relationships like that. I can't really express myself in a manner that not is not just uninterrupted, in a non-judgmental way, and a way that allows me to feel safe as a man, not being judged, then I truly believe that this person is going to be a friend forever. And I always say that I always want to surround myself around people that I can confide in, to the point where I can have them being my godfathers to my children. So I think creating that space, that family, is so important. Yeah, if someone's hurting, please do that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message, man. And I think you said it perfectly about it's not always about fixing people, because I know that's usually our natural like instinct. We want to help someone, we want to fix whatever they're going through, but it's giving them the space and letting them, vent and confide in you, and have just let them be open, and to get rid of whatever they're holding into. That's where the healing starts as well. So no, I totally agree. Ali, man, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I've loved our conversation. I think so many people can relate to your story and the work you do. And I think a lot of people can take something away from this. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Habibi. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Guys, to anyone listening, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And as always, I hope it helps. Peace.